Welcome to a world where family secrets never stay buried and perfection is only an illusion. Here, every smile hides a crack, every silence conceals a betrayal, and every happily ever after comes with a price. Step inside stories where mothers choose sides, sisters shine at weddings built on lies, and husbands carry secrets so dark they can't escape the whispers that follow them. Each twist pulls back the curtain on loyalty shattered, money misplaced, and forbidden affections that no one dares to admit. This isn't just family drama. It's the raw, unfiltered truth of what happens when the mask finally slips. Get ready to witness silence turned into the sharpest form of revenge, where those who pushed others aside find themselves choking on the chaos they created. If you think you know how these stories end, think again, because the twist no one expected is always waiting. The wedding invitation never came. Days turned into weeks, each one carrying whispers of preparations, floral arrangements, and guest lists, but there was only silence at the doorstep. The excuse was spun so neatly, avoiding awkwardness, as though removing one presence could preserve perfection. Yet that single act pulled away years of carefully stitched fabric, and the truth of the family's loyalties finally slipped into the open. Smiles that once seemed warm now appeared rehearsed like the lines of a play everyone else was in on. Behind the curtain of exclusion was a story no one dared to say aloud. The mother's hand was clear in it, her quiet nod, her tilted head, the subtle way she signaled who belonged and who did not. It wasn't protection, it was judgment, punishment wrapped as concern. And in that silence, a deeper betrayal echoed. The man who should have spoken, the one who vowed once upon a time to stand by loyalty, had instead chosen to protect his own secrets. The mask cracked when it became clear why silence had been so necessary. Late nights explained by work, the phone locked tighter than a safe, the half-smile that carried no warmth, that all converged with brutal clarity. He wasn't just quiet, he was complicit. His absence from the defense was no accident, it was strategy. By not inviting, by not questioning, he erased the risk of scandal spilling out in the wrong moment. Because scandal was already sitting on his shoulders, and the last thing he could afford was someone bold enough to pull the thread in front of a crowded room. The family played their part, nodding along, pretending this was about keeping peace. Yet every glance at his nervous gestures revealed more. The hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when footsteps entered the room, the whispered arguments that leaked through thin walls, the tension that tightened his jaw whenever another woman's name slipped too easily into conversation. These were not the signs of love, but of secrets rotting underneath, and still, they all looked away, preferring the facade of unity. But masks cannot last forever. It only takes one moment, one refusal, one missing invitation, for the cracks to widen enough that everyone sees. The betrayal wasn't simply in the exclusion. It was in the knowledge that silence was meant to shield him, not protect peace. Every word about awkwardness was less about family harmony and more about hiding what he could not confess. The wedding became the stage, the absence the spotlight, and the family's true loyalties were revealed under its glare. There is a particular kind of revenge in watching people try to smile through fractures, pretending their house isn't collapsing when the foundations have already turned to dust. That's when silence cuts deepest, because the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to be seen, and it was seen. Every ribbon shimmered under the golden lights, every flower arranged with a precision that looked almost unreal. The air smelled of roses, lilies, and expensive perfume, a fragrance meant to disguise the rot lingering beneath. Smiles stretched wide across polished faces, cameras flashed, and laughter filled the room, yet none of it could drown out the truth whispering just beneath the surface. It was supposed to be a perfect day, the kind of flawless celebration everyone envied, but that perfection was built on favoritism and lies. The mother's pride was obvious, the way she beamed as though the family's honor rested solely on this wedding. Every guest could see the favoritism dripping from her gestures, her words, the way she circled around the bride like a protective shield. It wasn't about love or joy, it was about appearances, and appearances always come at a cost. The cost here was silence, a silence demanded of anyone who knew too much, a silence that kept ugly truths locked away while the world was invited to watch the show. The husband stood there too, dressed sharply, every movement carefully calculated to blend into the charade. But his eyes gave him away. They weren't on the bride or the vows. They shifted nervously, always scanning, as though searching for a shadow he hoped wouldn't appear. He laughed when others laughed, clapped when expected, and leaned into conversations with a charm that seemed convincing enough to those who didn't know better. But there was a hollowness in him, a hollowness that carried the weight of secrets only a few dared to notice. The flowers couldn't hide where he had been weeks earlier, slipping out late at night, carrying a different kind of perfume back on his clothes. The ribbons couldn't mask the text messages that glowed on his phone, written in words too intimate to belong to someone outside his vows. The carefully staged perfection of the wedding was nothing more than camouflage for a betrayal that pulsed beneath the surface. Every guest sat oblivious, clinking glasses, while the truth simmered like a storm waiting for its strike. The twisted part was how the family embraced the charade. They knew, perhaps not every detail, but enough to sense the cracks. Yet they pressed forward, choosing the image of a flawless wedding over the reality of fractured trust. The mother's favoritism wasn't just toward the bride. It extended to protecting the lies that threatened to unravel everything. It was easier for her to silence, to exclude, to pretend. After all, pretending kept her story neat, even as the truth poisoned the roots of the family tree. Perfection is fragile. One wrong move, one unguarded whisper, one secret exposed, and it all collapses. That day, with ribbons and flowers carefully hiding the rot, it became clear that perfection wasn't real. It never was, and nothing built on lies ever lasts. The vows echoed through the hall, words heavy with promises of forever, yet hollow for the ones who knew better. Applause rose like thunder, but behind the noise, whispers carried more weight than the vows themselves. They spoke of late night calls, of meetings that ended too late to be explained away, of secrets that clung to him like a second skin. Every smile he wore was practiced, every gesture rehearsed, but the unease lingered, as if everyone in the room could sense something wasn't right. The suit fit perfectly, the tie knotted with precision, yet no amount of polish could hide the flicker in his eyes. They darted too quickly, scanning faces in the crowd, searching for a threat that wasn't supposed to exist at a wedding. When the bride slipped her hand into his, the grip seemed too tight, not with affection, but with the desperation of someone trying to hold a story together. The truth was that loyalty had been fractured long before the ceremony began. The phone was the first crack, locked with passwords, clutched close as though it carried gold. It became his shield. Every buzz, every vibration drew him into shadows, his voice dropping to whispers that never sounded like business. Nights stretched into dawns with excuses about work, yet the glow of text messages and the scent of unfamiliar perfume told another story. He thought the darkness protected him, but walls are thin, and silence always finds a way to speak. Those who noticed chose to look away. Families protect images, not truths. So they smiled, lifted glasses, and let the wedding proceed as though nothing was wrong. But silence is fragile. Behind the laughter, behind the music, suspicion grew. A few words shared in hushed tones traveled quickly, spreading through the room like cracks in glass. Every guest who heard the whispers looked at him differently, some with pity, others with quiet judgment. And still he smiled as though nothing could touch him. But lies have a way of crawling into the light. The whispers weren't just rumors. They were evidence waiting for their moment. The secret meetings weren't accidents, they were choices. The late night calls weren't mistakes, they were patterns. And the perfect wedding day, carefully constructed with flowers and music, began to feel less like a celebration and more like a performance staged to cover the truth. There is a strange satisfaction in watching someone choke on the very lies they thought would save them. That day, while vows were spoken and glasses were raised, It was clear that joy could never erase suspicion, and secrets always demand their price. A mother's voice once carried the kind of warmth that could quiet storms. It was the sound of comfort, the reassurance that no matter how broken the world became, there would always be one place where safety lived. But that same voice shifted, hardening into something unrecognizable. It became a tool not of protection, but of control. Silence, once offered as peace, was now used as a weapon. Every word left unsaid, every truth buried, every look of dismissal, it all built a wall between blood and belonging. When the cracks in the family began to widen, her choice was clear. She didn't reach for balance, she reached for convenience. She chose sides, not based on right or wrong, but on what would keep the image intact, what would save the family name from being whispered about at dinners and gatherings. Her silence wasn't neutral. It was deliberate, a refusal to acknowledge the lies threaded through the husband's life. Each time questions rose, each time evidence lingered too close to the surface, she smothered it with the same phrase, "Let's not cause trouble." Trouble in her eyes was not the betrayal, not the secrets, but the exposure. The cost of her silence was exile, not his, not the one who broke vows and spun deceit. Instead, the weight fell on anyone who dared to speak against him. The story was rewritten, not to reflect the truth, but to paint those who questioned as bitter, dramatic, unstable. It was easier for her to sacrifice one than to admit she had raised a family where loyalty bent to lies. And so the silence grew. It sat at dinner tables, thick and suffocating. It echoed in rooms where laughter once lived. It followed into gatherings where smiles seemed forced, where the air buzzed with tension everyone pretended not to notice. Her silence protected him, guarded him, shielded him while it erased the one who had been wronged. That was her choice, that was her legacy, but silence can't kill truth. It only delays its arrival. Every secret he thought safe, every lie she thought buried, waited in the shadows, patient and merciless. And the day came when the whispers grew too loud, when the proof could no longer be ignored, when even the mother's silence couldn't hold back the flood. There is nothing more devastating than realizing the very voice that once promised to protect had instead delivered betrayal. And in the end, her silence didn't save the family. It destroyed it. What began as a flawless wedding unraveled in ways no one could have scripted. The hall was dressed in perfection, tables lined with crystal glasses, music drifting like silk through the air, and every guest caught in the illusion that this was a day of nothing but joy. Yet beneath the surface, tension swelled, waiting for the moment it could no longer be contained. What should have been a celebration of unity became a theater of secrets, each one clawing to be revealed. It started small, a slip of a conversation not meant to be overheard. Words about money changing hands where it shouldn't have, debts hidden, promises made to strangers instead of family. The whispers spread quickly, passing from one corner of the room to the next, and soon laughter began to feel forced, fragile. Eyes darted toward the husband more often, his smile stretched too wide, his hand gripping the edge of his glass as though it might shatter. But money wasn't the only secret haunting the celebration. Loyalty was questioned in ways that cut deeper than finances. Friends who had stood beside him for years knew pieces of his truth, but never the whole. They carried their knowledge like a burden, and as the drinks flowed, the weight of silence became too heavy to hold. The loyalty of friends, the trust of family, the very bonds that were supposed to make the day sacred, every one of them fractured under the pressure of what had been concealed for too long. And then came the revelation no one expected, the one that stripped the air from the room. Affection, forbidden and reckless, tangled him in a story that should never have existed. It wasn't just the late night calls or the secret meetings. It was the undeniable proof of something deeper, something that mocked the vows spoken only moments before. Gasps rippled through the crowd, eyes widened, and in an instant the perfect day crumbled into something raw and unforgettable. The bride's tears were hidden behind a practiced smile, but her trembling hands betrayed her. The mother's face hardened, lips pressed into a line of denial, yet her silence was louder than any defense. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, caught between politeness and horror, unsure whether to stay or to run from the spectacle. And at the center of it all stood the husband, the man who had built his life on shadows, finally cornered by the ghosts he thought he could bury. Perfection is a fragile illusion. All it takes is one truth, one slip, one twist no one expects to tear it apart. And that day, every secret he thought hidden was dragged into the light where it could never be ignored again. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fire or fury. Sometimes it's as quiet as stepping back, letting the stage collapse under the weight of its own lies. That silence becomes sharper than any scream, more punishing than any confrontation. It was in that silence that everything began to unravel, not with accusations, not with shouting, but with the stillness of watching secrets drag their owners down. The family had gone to great lengths to cut out what they feared most, the truth. They thought by excluding, by silencing, by painting over cracks with ribbons and flowers, they had built something unshakable. But truth doesn't disappear simply because it isn't spoken. It waits, lurking, patient. And in those shadows, it was satisfying to see their carefully staged perfection implode piece by piece. He was the first to falter. The husband, whose confidence once carried him through every room, began to choke on the very lies that had seemed so untouchable. The whispers about his late night calls, the rumors of meetings in places no husband should be, the faint perfume clinging to him that wasn't his wife's. All of it grew louder the moment silence stopped protecting him. Each lie he spun tangled with the next until the web collapsed, and suddenly every glance toward him carried suspicion. The mother, who once believed her silence could preserve dignity, found herself trapped in it. By choosing sides, by burying the truth, she had only protected him long enough for the damage to grow unbearable. Now her silence looked less like wisdom and more like complicity. The same lips that once dismissed every concern as drama could no longer form words because everyone knew she had seen and chosen not to speak. The sisters' wedding, dressed in false perfection, became a spectacle of unraveling loyalties. Guests whispered, some even left early, unable to sit in a room where the tension had become suffocating. The flowers, the music, the promises, it all seemed absurd in the face of betrayal so raw and visible. Their perfect day wasn't ruined by outsiders. It collapsed from within. And through it all, silence became the most devastating revenge. No confrontations, no exposure, no scenes created. Just the simple act of letting them choke on the consequences of their own deceit. They had pushed away, excluded, dismissed, thinking they had silenced what could hurt them most. But in the end, what destroyed them wasn't the voice they tried to erase. It was the truth they tried to hide. There is a power in quiet revenge, in watching from the shadows as those who betrayed are left to face the ruins they created. And nothing is more punishing than realizing their destruction was entirely of their own making. If this story left you questioning what's real behind the smiles, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Here, every secret comes to light, every betrayal finds its voice, and every silence writes its own revenge. Stay with us for more stories that expose the hidden cracks in family, loyalty, and love. Your next twist is just one story away.